So I have two big topics I want to cover before Once Justice 2's big reveal at New York Comic Con, where we're finally going to see gameplay, and I figure because there's such a short amount of time between now and then, I should probably get to it. The first major topic I want to cover is a pretty fundamental thing about the game, and that is the team size of Once Justice 2. To be clear, because I know this can get a little confusing, especially if you're not familiar with fighting game terminology, when we talk about team size, we're specifically referring to the number of characters, not the number of players. For example, a fighting game player would describe Dragon Ball FighterZ as a 3 versus 3 game, but in reality, it's a 1 versus 1 game where you control 3 characters. Again, I think this distinction is incredibly important because if you play any other genre of game and you hear 3 versus 3, you're going to think that means the number of players. Outside of rare exceptions, in fighting games, when we refer to 3 versus 3 or 2 versus 2, we're talking about the number of characters each player controls, because generally, again, with rare exceptions, fighting games are more often than not 1 player versus 1 player. So if you come from another genre of game, it's easy to make the mistake. I've already briefly touched on my own personal preferences in a previous video, but personally, I would like a traditional 1 versus 1 format. No assists or sidekicks as they're called in Once Justice, no tagging, just a basic 1 versus 1 game. I put a poll out on Twitter that has around 100-ish votes now, and at least the people who follow me on Twitter seem to be split around about the middle. About half the people want 1v1, and about half the people want 3 versus 3 with a tag feature, meaning you can switch between each of your characters. But the vast majority of people seem to agree that we want something else from the system that was offered in the previous game, which was 3 versus 3, but you couldn't switch between your active character. You could only use the 2 sidekick characters as assists. None of this is a deal breaker for me. I'll be happy with any of these options, but I do have a slight preference towards traditional 1v1, and then I don't really know which one I would prefer, assists or the tag system. I haven't put a lot of thought into it. I did want to cover this topic specifically in a video because I saw a lot of people running with this idea of traditional 1v1 being confirmed. Now, keep in mind that I would love that. In fact, that would be my ideal format, but I don't think it's confirmed. In case you missed it in my previous video where we talked about the website being launched, there is a piece of Japanese text that has 1v1 in it somewhere. Now, according to Google Translate, this is what it translates to. Now, Google Translate can be a little bit fuzzy, of course, because that's not a very coherent sentence. I don't have the person I normally go over Japanese text with available right now, but if I had to guess, this probably more accurately translates to something like, use your quirk-enhanced abilities in 1 versus 1 combat, or something along those lines. Since the time of me recording that line, Griffin Station actually got back to me and said it translates to something pretty close to full-blown quirk, 1v1 battle action. That might sound weird. That's because in the Japanese version of My Hero Academia, they don't use the word quirk or anything close to it. They use individuality is how they describe someone's ability. So that's why that line looks kind of weird. So that confirms 1 versus 1, right? No. I know it specifically says 1v1, but remember that talk we just had about confusing terminology of 1 versus 1 and 3 versus 3 in fighting games? Well, the reverse of that could be happening here. Bandai Namco or Viking Studios or whoever's decision this was could be referring to a 3 versus 3 game as a 1 versus 1 game because it's still 1 player versus 1 player, especially if it's like Once Justice 1, where you couldn't switch between characters, only being able to use them as sidekicks. For example, Once Justice, the previous title, was described by IGN as one-on-one, and the official description of the game specifically says head-to-head, which could be interpreted as 1 versus 1. With that said, the website doesn't specifically mention any supports or sidekicks like the previous website did, so I'll say that traditional 1 versus 1 is probably a more likely outcome, but not by much. As of right now, I think it's best to assume that we will get the standard support and sidekick system that we had in the previous game returning in this one until they say something else on the matter. Though it is worth mentioning that the terminology of 1 versus 1 at least heavily suggests that we aren't getting a traditional 3 versus 3 game where you can tag in and out of characters or any other combination of numbers. We're probably not getting a 2 versus 2 game where you can switch out. We're probably not getting a 4 versus 4 or something crazy like that. 1v1 probably means either traditional 1v1 or 1v1 with your 2 assists. Though it could still mean a traditional 3v3 tag system, because 1v1 could be referring to the 2 players. Anyway, that's all I have to say on the matter. I know it gets kind of confusing when we're throwing around all these numbers so quickly, but I hope you were able to follow along. There should be plenty of more One's Justice news right around the corner. I do have one more One's Justice video I want to do before New York Comic Con, which should be later this week, where we get that brand new trailer. Well, this coming week. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. My name is Bilbzy, and I'll see you in the next one.